Hello everyone and welcome to CUTV. My name is Charissa and today on our panel we are talking about Brexit, more specifically what Brexit means for students. So today we are speaking to Freddie Poser, who is Vice Chair of the Cambridge University Liberal Association.
Yeah, I'm very anti-Brexit. I am a big supporter of the People's Vote campaign, but I would also happily stop Brexit with a simple revocation of Article 50.
Next we have Oliver Riley, who is Chairman of Cambridge University Conservative Association.
So I'm pro-Brexit. I would say I was cautiously optimistic about it, but very disappointed in the complete lack of nuance surrounding discussions about it.
And we also have Owen Dowling, who is Class Officer of the Cambridge University Labour Club.
I'm sympathetic to Benite sort of Euroscepticism, and I wouldn't touch the People's Vote campaign with a 10-foot pole.
We have Sean Shirley-Smith, who's Executive Committee Member of Cambridge Socialist Society.
I'm pro-Lexit, so very, very anti-EU on a socialist perspective, although I do think the current government's plans are not great.
And lastly, Luke Callum, who is Chair of Cambridge University Liberal Association.
I would very much touch the People's Vote campaign with 10-foot pole. I'm in favour of a referendum on our future in Europe, because I think any sort of Brexit will be an absolute disaster, not just for students, but for the whole country. So our first topic of conversation are the general perceptions around student opinion and engagement with Brexit. So studies have suggested that over 70% of 18 to 24-year-olds who did vote in the referendum voted to remain. So given the fact that students are traditionally generalised as apathetic to politics, how do you think the referendum has changed it, if it has, and why?
So I do a lot of work around student mobilisation in politics and specifically for a People's Vote. You know, I think it's incredibly important that students get involved in what is really the biggest issue that's facing the country at the moment. I think a lot of students, as you say, are very anti-Brexit. That's still the case, if not more so than it was in 2016. I think a lot of students, though, are bored of Brexit. They don't want to keep hearing the same arguments again and again and again. I think that's like a lot of the population. And I think a lot of students, though, if you ask them, they say they do want a People's Vote. And I think we see that in the mass mobilisations where there were thousands of young people on the streets of London just recently for the People's Vote March.
I think it's important to remember, A, that students are only one part of the wider population, so even though students did apparently vote in favour of Brexit in favour of remaining by quite a large margin, that doesn't outweigh the fact that every person has one vote and the rest of the population.
But the question was about students.
Coming on to that. In students in general, I think a lot of them are just happy to sort of get on with it. As you say, they're bored of Brexit, they're fed up about hearing it day in, day out. Most of them just want the government to get on with having a Brexit deal that works for most people and then get on with our lives and focus on far more important issues like poverty, homelessness, education for students specifically, universities. I don't think that they want to rerun a campaign we had in 2016 when the country's already made its mind up.
I was going to say, I disagree. I think that obviously people are bored of the Brexit process, but they far from want the government to get on with it. They're bored of the fact that the government is getting on with it. And I think to assume that sort of we can get Brexit over with and sort out the other problems this country has is not really the truth, because students instinctively know that Brexit is a project which is anti-immigrant, it's anti-progress, and I think this is what's mobilising students. So we are bored, but we're bored of this right-wing Tory government trying to push us down a route where the vast majority of young people, whose voices matter, I wouldn't say more than other people's, but more than sort of the mainstream narrative make out. 1.5 million people have turned 18 since the 2016 referendum. They're now rightly angry that they're not being given a voice in these negotiations.
Can I just say that I disagree with your notion that the government are getting on with it and people are fed up with the government getting on with it. I would say the complete opposite, and I think anyone who's picked up a newspaper and read about Brexit recently would agree with me that the disillusionment from people around the country about Brexit is specifically because nothing has happened. We've been promised deadlines, we've had extensions to these deadlines, and what have we seen in terms of real progress that we can actually measure? I think very, very little, and people feel really kind of cast aside and disregarded by, rightly or wrongly, a political class they identify as completely opposite to themselves, and I think that you can recognise Brexit as a backlash against that.
I think I agree with sort of like a synthesis of a couple of points being made there. I agree that students generally are opposed to Brexit, especially the right-wing Brexit that Luke correctly characterised as being pushed. You know, students will see, you know, racists and far-right speakers like Farage and Michael Gove and Boris Johnson, and then even the alt-right supporting Brexit and rightly oppose it as the racist project that they would make it. I don't necessarily agree with the characterisation of students as sort of necessarily apathetic until Brexit. I think the 2010 and 11 student movement against tuition fees shows that students can be mobilised. I think it's important to remember as well that sort of the whole Lexit arguments. In 2016 there was no left on offer at all. It was the sort of vacuous centre against the rabidly racist right. Whereas now we're in a situation where whether you are pro-Leave or pro-Remain, there is a populist left alternative that I think that students would be getting behind in the current Labour Party. So I think it's more complicated than the issue of Leave or Remain when it comes to political involvement.
But then why is Labour doing so badly and Remain parties such as Lib Dems and Greens are surging?
That's wrong.
Yeah, so to put that into context, obviously local election turnout, which is what you're referring to, was about 25 to 30%, so it's just flat out not representative of the majority of people. Labour did worse in Leave areas than it did in Remain areas, and even then it was only losing around 5% of the actual vote share in those seats. Going back to your earlier point about how Brexit is an anti-immigrant thing, as an EU immigrant myself, first generation, I know that the overwhelming majority of British people who voted to leave did not do so because they're anti-immigrant. And I think young people, especially among the left and Labour in general, understand that as well. There are valid arguments about the EU to be made, which can appeal to everyone in society, not just the hard right.
I think that it's right, there are valid arguments against the EU, and better arguments, I guess, than the right-wing ones are made by Lexiteers, that's true. But I think to say that the majority of people did not have immigration on their mind is a joke. Because if we look at the 2015 election, that shows us that immigration was a huge topic. Every single party felt they had to touch immigration because of the surge of UKIP, and that showed a massive rise in anti-immigrant feeling. And the idea that was suddenly evaporated when everyone thought very long and hard about the social implications of the border being, a border in the east of Europe rather than in the English Channel is just fallacious.
Okay, can I just interrupt there? So I'd like to come back to your question. So regarding, this idea that everyone who voted to leave was thinking very heavily about immigration, and also given this supposed Remain majority amongst students, do you feel as though this has made people who support Brexit afraid to speak out, and do you feel that that's problematic?
I don't know really. I mean, as I say, I can't talk from personal experience because I'm not strong with one position or the other. Mm-hmm. When it comes to EU itself. When it comes to the actually existing Brexit campaign, I was obviously fully opposed because it was a reactionary and racist project, which Freddie was right to point out. Although I think, we can think a bit dialectically about this sort of thing. The vote to leave in 2016 was, I think, largely informed by anti-immigrant sentiment. But I think it's quite a pessimistic and despairing reading of that to say that necessarily there can be no positive alternative of an anti-racist, internationalist nature drawn from this, because working people in this country are completely alienated by the status quo, by years of crushing austerity pushed by very parties that now profess to be, pushing the people's vote. And, people were pushed towards an anti-immigrant direction by the surge of UKIP and the BBC and this sort of thing. But I think, we can find I'm not really ashamed about the Labour left and the Corbyn project. I think we can find a movement that both meets working people's demands, but channels their anger and discontent towards their real enemy, which is the current economic status quo, rather than, migrants or other poor people.
But if this is true, then why is Corbyn given up on the principle of free movement?
I don't actually agree with the Labour line at the moment. I think it's I do support free movement. Because I support free movement, I oppose the EU, because the EU is a necessarily racist and violent organisation against people of the global south. I disagree with the Labour line actually, and I wish they would go back to free movement, but nevertheless I think that a migration policy under any Labour government would necessarily be more anti-racist and just than that under any other party in the EU or out. You know, the Blairites and the Liberal Democrats who are currently in the People's Vote campaign are of the same sort of political stance that supported Yarl's Wood and the security state, which has had profoundly racist implications for migrants and people of colour. So I think it's a finely nuanced.
The Lib Dems have always been in favour of civil liberties,
And that's seen in opposition to a lot of Blair's policies at the time, that Liberal Democrats were the main fighting force actually in Parliament against that. So I think it's unfair to paint us with the same brush.
as well as Theresa May's hostile environment, which we've always opposed, but she was in charge of the department. So.
Well, I should add, it's something I oppose too, but just going on from the reasons as to why people voted for Leave and how much of a factor immigration played into that, I think is best highlighted by the largest and most comprehensive poll of voter intentions by Lord Ashcroft, done on the day of the referendum. And this indicated that by far and away, the largest reason that people, or the most often given reason that people voted to leave, was not, in fact, immigration. In fact, immigration only came third, even though I think it got less than a third of the people surveyed actually mentioned immigration as a reason. By far and away the largest was sovereignty. And I think there's a real sense of national identity that people felt that they were losing touch with through the EU. And I think, as Owen said, there were large numbers of people who felt that they were being left behind by this kind of globalist, cosmopolitan body that is the EU, and in not a good way. And we can interpret, I think, the decision to leave not as a rejection of immigration. I think that's only a small part, and to focus on it is to miss the wider picture and is to kind of lose nuance in your argument. The larger argument is that it's a backlash against kind of globalization by the people who have been completely left out by globalization. And the way to win these people over is not to disregard their democratic choice, which, I mean, it's an oft-repeated trope, but I think it's definitely worth bearing in mind that more people voted to leave the European Union than have voted for anything ever in British political history. This is a really big thing that concerns an awful lot of people. And